They see me rolling, they hating. Make no mistake, this is my excited face. This is the reason that I'm here. This is why I'm in France. This is the vehicle I've been waiting all week to drive. This is a car I thought I would never, ever get the chance to experience. This is a Ford Model T. I began my series on iconic cars with the VW Beetle, and that's no doubt a historically very significant vehicle. However, when it comes to production cars for the masses, this is Genesis. Now, truth be told, before the beginning of this week, I didn't really know that much about the Model T. But I've been researching it all week, and so I'm going to share with you a few of the things that I thought were quite surprising and that I don't think everybody knows. Henry Ford was certainly a controversial character, and it would be fair to say that although he was an incredibly successful businessman, he was certainly not your typical businessman. In fact, he was much more of an engineer. Now, the Ford Model T was not the first car that he produced. In fact, it wasn't the first company to bear the Ford name. Ford had actually started working for the Edison Motor Vehicle Company. He then went on to work for the Henry Ford Motor Company. He then left that and then started the Ford Motor Company that we know today. So he really wasn't a man that experienced success from the get-go. And really, on paper, you could look at the T and say that it's somewhat unremarkable. Very little about it could be considered a first. The automobile had existed in this sort of guise for a number of years, and the production line itself had already existed before too. But like many great things in history, Ford's real innovation was bringing together these processes. You'll notice here that this is called the universal car. And that really was the key concept that Ford was trying to get at. A car not just built for everybody, but priced for everybody. In terms of specification, the most famous thing about the T was the color choice. Henry Ford said, any color you like, as long as it's black. That's actually not strictly true. In the early days, you could have your T in a range of colors. It was only later that black became the sole option. And really, let's face it, a T is not a T if it's not black. The engine is a 2.9 litre, 8-valve, 4-cylinder unit, making around 20 horsepower and around 84 pound-foot of torque. That was enough to propel a relatively lightweight car onto a top speed of between 40 and 45 miles an hour. The real innovation here was the material used to construct the body. Ford discovered a crashed French racing car, so the story goes, and observed how well it had held together. They discovered that it was constructed using not traditional steel, but a steel vanadium alloy. At the time, the only people using this were the makers of very expensive and luxurious cars in France. So he imported a metallurgist, financed a whole steel mill, and used vanadium alloy to construct this car. That had the advantage of A, being a significant technical innovation, meaning you could of course advertise the car as being very advanced, and it was very strong for its weight. The idea being that, unlike many other cars from this period, it shouldn't simply fall apart. The price, on release in 1908, $825. And to give you some sort of frame of reference, at the time, the average annual income for a regular worker was somewhere between $200 to $400. So it wasn't dirt cheap, but it was certainly much more affordable and attainable than cars which had come before, which often cost 2 to 3 times as much, if not an awful lot more. Now for me, the true innovations of the Model T came after production had started. Now the car was very popular from the get-go. In the first year of production, Ford produced 10,000 Model Ts, and demand very quickly outstripped the capacity of his production facility at Piquette Avenue. So he opened a brand new facility at a place called Highland Park. This was a marvel of the modern era. It was a 62-acre, 4-story factory set up with the express purpose of building these cars. And the reason for doing this was twofold. Number one, he could build more. And number two, he could build more efficiently. By being able to do that, he could be much more aggressive with his pricing. And that had a dramatic effect on sales. By 1912, they sold 80,000 of these. By the early 1920s, they were selling 2 million a year. Now, the VW Beetle might hold the all-time production record of just over 21 million, but that was over 60 years. The T was in production for a third of that time. At one point in time, depending on who you believe, 90% of all cars in the world were Ford Model Ts. By any account, 6 out of 10 new cars sold at the time were Model Ts. This was not just a success, it was the success. I don't believe any car is ever going to have the remotest chance of coming close to the popularity that this did. The real competition at the time had 4 legs and was called Dobbin. Now, whilst this revolutionary production line process at the Highland Park factory helped slash the cost of a Model T from $825 down to $300 at its lowest, significantly the first time the price of a new automobile had been less than the average annual wage of an American worker, it did have some unintended negative consequences. The main one, worker dissatisfaction. You see, previously, the making of a car had been a very intensive but very involved process of people having to push cars around the factory. There was always something different for them to do. It kept them active physically and mentally. The new process was extremely laborious, very tedious, and very dull. And this is the same problem faced by many factories even in the modern day. Ford's solution was genius. You see, they had a big problem. Because people were getting bored so quickly and were not paid particularly well, $2.40 for a 9-hour day, they were leaving at an incredibly high rate. In fact, they had to hire nearly 1,000 people for every 100 jobs that they had simply because staff turnover was so high. They were spending a fortune on staff training only to see people leave a couple of months later. Well, his solution, one that doesn't seem very obvious from a business perspective, he more than doubled his workers' wages. He paid them $5 a day for an 8-hour day. This proved to be a masterstroke. First off, people stopped leaving. They were being paid brilliantly for a relatively easy job. Secondly, it stopped dead in its tracks plans to create a union at the Ford plant, because who'd want to complain about being given such a great wage? And best of all, he managed to turn his own workers into Ford customers, because so many of them decided that with all this new money that they had, they wanted to buy themselves their very own Model T. And so, of course, Ford realized that he was going to be seeing a lot of that $5 straight back anyway. In fact, his revenue went from $20 million to $60 million. He later called the doubling of wages the best cost-cutting measure he ever implemented. Not a bad idea, hey? But enough about the Ford legend. You want to know about the Ford car. Driving it is a little unusual. Let's see how it's done. So here's the car, and I'm going to show you briefly how to drive it. You'll notice I've already rigged my cameras up ready for the drive, which has been quite interesting to do. Now you'll observe down here that there are 3 pedals. Your left pedal is for your gears. Now I described it as an automatic gearbox, which I suppose you could say it is, but it's technically a manual, but there's no clutch. Essentially the first gear is used simply for getting you off the line or getting you up hills, and it's a basic planetary gear set, and second gear is direct. Over here on the right you have your handbrake. Now to start the vehicle you have to turn this switch to the left. Now I'm probably going to get a few things here slightly wrong because I have to explain things not just only through the filter of time but also through the filter of language, so I may make a few errors, please forgive me. To actually start the vehicle, turn that to the left. That's your starter button down here, little silver one, so you start it with your feet. Handbrake. So first gear is push this pedal back. On the right is the brake. And I had a mistranslation earlier. This middle one I thought was for a rear brake. I think actually that is the pedal for reverse. There's a separate pedal. Up here on the steering wheel, your controls, to be honest, they're not so much like a car. I think the closest thing in the modern world to this is, say, like a quad bike. So this is your throttle. Now for those of you watching from the USA or somewhere with left-hand drive vehicles, note this is a right-hand drive car. I asked them a little bit about the history of the car. As with anything 100 years old, there's not really a complete history. The one thing we do know, this was not a British Model T, so it could have come from any right-hand drive market, possibly Australia, I suppose possibly India, somewhere like that, maybe even China. But it was not a British car, but the exact origin is unknown, it's lost to time. And a key reason I mention this is because in the USA and in left-hand drive versions of the car, these two stalks, their positions are reversed. So this is throttle. Notice how you can just set it and leave it. So lovely for sort of going along, but of course, if you're used to stuff springing back when you let go, as you would be with a modern vehicle, you'll be surprised. Over here, I thought this was the choke. It is not. This is the timing. So you can advance the spark, and there's some useful marks have been made to assist you with the position that the car should be in for various different modes. Yeah, that's basically it. It's going to be interesting. We're going to have a quick break now, and then as soon as we return from lunch, a most important fixture in the French calendar, I'm going to head out. Wish me luck. So this is Marie, this is the car's owner, and she's kindly letting me have a go and showing me how it works. So it's quite interesting because we've just taken off. Now I put a camera down here so you can actually see what's happening with the pedals. And people ask that a lot, but it's not very easy to do in most cars. But in this car, actually, we can do it. And so you can see, actually, you get off, you actually start the car with it in direct, and you can put it into first gear. And when you put it into first gear, you saw the car just pull away, and you didn't actually use much of the throttle there. So it's quite a different way of working. I'm very, very high. The side is very low. And it feels like we're going quite fast, even though I'm sure we're not. I'm having to mount all my cameras in very different and unusual ways. So hopefully you guys can appreciate what's going on here. It's not a conventional setup in any shape or form. What? I always panic when I see big curves because I'm used to driving modern sports cars with very low profile tyres, but all the cars I've driven this week have had massive tyres, very soft suspension, so they're built for this kind of thing. Where? So you just use the handbrake there?
First, this and here, one more.
Okay, yeah. So there we go, don't go into a circle too fast because I can tip over. That will be bad. That'll be a bad end to a good day.
Yes, of course. Hard.
Okay, start the car before.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Oh.
Yes, you see?
Okay, I understand, yep.
Yeah.
So it's like a clutch. It's like a clutch, so... After I've done this to the first position?
Yes, first position and quick second position. And the front. Very, because it's bounce. And you must be very maximum.
Quickly?
Always. Yes. When you begin, not so little.
So I'm doing it too slow?
Yes, if you want. And your feet, I think, yes, you see here.
Yeah.
Of course.
Like that?
Yes, you have big feet.
Okay, so let's try this again. No.
Oh.
Quoi passe?
It's good there.
That's okay there?
Yes.
So why is it still? I'm trying to work this out. This is an interesting experiment.
No. Better.
Okay. I think the handbrake is on a bit too much, so.
No. Yes.
Okay. Et maintenant? Okay, is that on? Okay, put it into direct drive. No. No.
No, again. You can.
Wait. Okay, so this is kind of. All right, so I'm gonna get this thing moving. Ah! And now. No. No. Very sensitive. Is this throttle is really like super. I'm still in first. I want to get it out of the first. Oh, I'm driving a Model T. I feel like that's going to go too fast. So there's a neutral in between the two positions. I got to be so careful. I do not want to break this lady's prized possession. This is a 100-year-old car. To tell you the truth, one of the things that's been lost in time is the actual exact date of this car's production. But they know enough about the model that they suspect that it's between 1917 and 1919. So it's 2018 now. It's 100 years old. Okay, I'm going to try and stop this now. Next to Marie. I think the problem is that actually in the second gear it's too fast for here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oh, it's so different. It's really different. What? Okay, and we're off. So I'm going to do a slightly longer route this time. I'm going to try and take it up onto the road. Oh, it's so weird. It's really, really weird. It feels really quick. I've never felt this fast in a car. I don't want to break the lady's car. Ah. No. 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 Wait. that one?
Yes, you can. Don't forget.
So a little of this and a little of that.
Maximum.
Maximum.
And the funk. Yes.
This is really quite an incredible experience. It's obviously a difficult thing to drive, although I'm getting used to it. My driving experience is simply what you guys have seen. Now, the great thing about the Model T, really, is that it was a car of the people when it was new. And it's a car of the people now. There's a Frenchman pissing in the bushes. It's normal. I'm driving a Model T. Everything is strange. It's really sensitive. This throttle lever is so sensitive. Shit. Oh, fucking hell, that's... This is easier. Okay. The great thing about the Model T is that when it came out, it was a car for the people. And 100 years later, it still is. Because they made 15 million of these things, there's still loads of them available. And because they are not the easiest thing in the world to pilot, and they are very, very old, I think a lot of people are put off. But the truth is, or so I'm told, maintenance and so on them is actually not that bad. Spares are plentifully available, loads of them in breakers yards, and you can do whatever you want with them. You can have them as sort of family cars like this one is. There's vintage trucks. People turn them into hot rods, rat rods, whatever you want. You can do anything you like with a Model T. And they're not expensive. I was looking earlier on a website and there's projects from a few £1,000s up to nice ready-to-go examples for about 10 to 20,000. As classic cars go, that's cheap. That's really, really cheap. Just try and find me a decent classic 911 for that money now. And this, okay, yeah, all right, 911 is going to be loads easier to drive. You can use it every day if you want to. You certainly can't with this. But this thing, this is an icon. This car is a legend. It's the car that started it all. And I think for this, any price is a bargain. But I'm sure Mr. Ford will be very happy to know that 100 years later, people are still talking about his car. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have. So, thanks for watching. And let's see if I can stop this without stalling it. Goodbye, everyone. Hope you've had a good day.